Hey crew, it's Pitt, and I'm back with some more Gnosis. Today we are diving back into the works of Rudolph Steiner. This is Christianity as a Mystical Fact. We are reading aloud and discussing as we go along the various points brought to light by the text. It's not the format for everyone, but people do find value in it, so you are more than welcome to tag along as we continue our exploration. Before we begin, however, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in the terminology, there will be several playlists linked in the corner above, in the box down below, along with the original source material and the link for my book, so that you can get a better understanding of who I am and why I say the things that I do. With that being said, we are going to dive in, and a particular note again today is almost certainly going to be the Unconventional Bible Study, which is 162 videos of me reading the Bible and discovering that it is not something to be relied upon. Now, with that being said, we are going to dive in and continue our exploration of Christianity as a mystical fact with Chapter 10, Yeshua and his historical background. In the wisdom of the mysteries is to be sought the soil out of which grew the spirit of Christianity. All that was needed was the gaining ground of the fundamental conviction that this spirit must be introduced into life in greater measure than had been the case with the mysteries. But such a conviction was widely spread, as may be seen from the manner of life of the Essenes and the Therapeutai, who existed long before Christianity arose. Long before. The Essenes were a secluded sect living in Palestine, whose numbers at the time of Christ were estimated at 4,000. They formed a community which required that its members should lead a life which developed a higher life within the soul and brought about a new birth. The aspirant for admission was subjected to a severe test in order to ascertain whether he were ripe for preparing himself for a higher life. If he was admitted, he had to undergo a period of probation and to take a solemn oath that he would not betray to strangers the secrets of the Essenian discipline. The object of this life was the conquest of the lower nature in man, so that the spirit latent within him might be awakened ever more and more. One who had experienced, up to a certain point, the spirit within him, was raised to a higher grade and enjoyed a corresponding degree of authority, not forced from without, but conditioned by the nature of things. Akin to the Essenes were the Therapeutai, who dwelt in Egypt. We've dealt with both the Essenes and the Therapeutai several times already. They lived a life of asceticism, which means that they denied the vices completely, which means that they were living a prideful life and therefore consumed by the vice of pride. And if you were saying, I am better than you because I only eat bread and water, that's pride. If you were saying, I am better than you because I don't have sex ever, that's pride. If you were saying, I am better than you because I don't have any possessions, that's pride. We get all the desirable details of their mode of life in a treatise by the philosopher Philo on the contemplative life. The dispute as to the authenticity of this work must now be regarded as settled, and it may be rightly assumed that Philo really described the life of a community existing long before Christianity and well known to him. Cf. on the subject G.R. Mead's Fragments of a Faith Forgotten, which we have just completed the entirety of, and there are definitely some nuggets of wisdom in there, and there are definitely some things that you should dismiss in there, and it is a very good study if you are interested. A few passages from Philo's treatise will give an idea of the main tenets of the Therapeutai. The dwellings of the members of the community are extremely simple, only affording necessary shelter from extreme heat and cold. The dwellings are not built close together as in towns, for contiguity has no attraction for one who wishes for solitude. Nor are they at a great distance from one another, in order that the social relations, so dear to them, may not be made difficult, and that they may easily be able to assist each other in the case of an attack by brigands. In each house is a consecrated room, called a temple or monasterion, a small room or a cell, in which the mysteries of the higher life are cultivated. They also possess works by ancient authors who once directed their school, and left behind many explanations about the customary method used in allegorical writings. Their interpretation of sacred writings is directed to the deeper meaning of the allegorical narratives. We thus see that what had been striven after in the narrower circle of the mysteries was being made general, but such a generalization naturally weakened the severe character. The Essenes and therapeutic communities form a natural transition from the mysteries to Christianity. But Christianity wished to extend to humanity in general what with the Essenes and Therapeutai was an affair of a sect. This, of course, prepared the way for a still further weakening of the old severe forms. The existence of such sects made it possible to understand how far the time was ripe for the comprehension of the mystery of the Christ. In the mysteries, a man was artificially prepared for the dawning of his consciousness at the appropriate time of the spiritual world. Within the Essene or therapeutic community, the soul sought, by a certain mode of life, to become ripe for the awakening of the higher man. A further step forward is that man struggles through to a feeling that a human individuality may have evolved to higher and higher stages of perfection in repeated earth lives. One who had arrived at a glimpse of this truth would also be able to feel that in Yeshua, a being of lofty spirituality had appeared. The loftier the spirituality, the greater the possibility of accomplishing something of importance. Thus, the individuality of Yeshua could become capable of accomplishing the deed which the evangelists so mysteriously indicate in the baptism by John, and which, by the way, they speak of it, so clearly point out as of the utmost importance. The personality of Yeshua became able to receive into his own soul Christ, the Logos, who was made flesh in that soul. And again, I am going to point out that this is an impossibility, right? The Christ, whatever, that is a description of something else. But the Logos cannot be personified. That is not a thing that can happen. Every single thing in existence all partake of the Logos in exact same measure. I take of it, you take of it, this wall takes of it, and the air around us is all equally part of the Logos, and therefore it cannot manifest in the flesh. That is an impossibility. It is not even something that really can be contemplated. Thenceforward, the ego of Yeshua of Nazareth was the Christ, and the outer personality was the vehicle of the Logos. The event of the ego of Yeshua becoming the Christ is enacted in the baptism by St. John. It is important to note that if it was not until the baptism by John, then the whole Mary and Joseph left him at the temple for a couple of days and he was teaching the teachers, that didn't happen, right? The whole walking into the room and John the Baptist was still being carried by his mother in the same way that Jesus was, and walked into the room and he jumped with the filling of the Holy Spirit. Well, if that didn't happen until the baptism, that didn't happen then either. And so once again, we have directly contradictory accounts of what is going on inside the book, right? Often within the same chapter, there are directly contradictory statements, things that do not work together at all, right? If it is not until the baptism, then all of the things prior to it is null, void, without any meaning whatsoever. Back to the text. During the period of the mysteries, union with the Spirit was only for those who were initiated. Amongst the Essenes, a whole community cultivated a life by means of which all of its members were able to arrive at the mystical union. In the coming of Christ, something, an example, the deeds of Christ, was placed before the whole of humanity so that all might share in the mystical union. And that's what happened. We all share in the mystical union of higher enlightenment because of the deeds of Christ. You are absolutely correct. That is exactly what happened. Chapter 11. The nature of Christianity. The deepest effect must have been produced upon believers in Christianity by the fact that the divine, the Word, the eternal Logos, no longer came to them in the dim twilight of the mysteries as spirit only, but that when they spoke of the Logos, they were made to think of the historical human personality of Yeshua. Yeah, that is indeed the deepest effect that has been produced upon believers. It has shifted the ability to do the thing that you were supposed to do onto someone else, right? That whole victim mentality thing that we talk about so much, someone else is now responsible for the thing that you were supposed to be. Same thing here, right? In the effect shifted from the eternal ever-flowing logos, which was symbolized by fire and light, into this one person. Right? It shifted the entire concept of what it is, because logos prior to that is ever-existing, all-powerful movement of the word of creation. That's literally what the logos is. It is the exact same as the I am statement from Genesis. Completely different than any personification. It took something that was spiritual and made it into a mortal thing. I wonder if maybe that had some consequences. Formerly, the logos had only been seen in different degrees of human perfection. That again is a misunderstanding of what the logos actually is. The delicate, subtle differences in the spiritual life of personalities, which could be observed, and the manner and degree which the logos became living within those seeking initiation. A higher degree of maturity was to be interpreted as a higher stage of evolution of spiritual life. The preparatory steps had to be sought in a spiritual life already passed through, and the present life was to be regarded as the preparatory stage for future degrees of spiritual evolution. The conservation of the spiritual power of the soul and the eternity of that force might be stated in the words of a Jewish occulted teaching in the book of the Zohar. Nothing in the world is lost, nothing falls into the void, not even the words and voice of man. Everything has its place and purport. Personality was but a metamorphosis of the soul, which develops from one personality to another. The single life of the personality was only considered as a link in the chain of development, stretching backwards and forwards. This logos, metamorphosing itself in many separate human personalities, has through Christianity been directed away from these to the one unique personality of Yeshua. What had been previously distributed throughout the world was now united in a single personality. I'm sure that is exactly how that happened. Yeshua became the unique God-man. In Yeshua, something was present once which must appear to man as the greatest of ideals, and with which, in the course of man's repeated earthly lives, he ought to be more and more united. Yeshua took upon himself the divinization of the whole of humanity. In him was sought what formerly could only be sought in a man's own particular soul. Yes, once again, encouraging that victim mentality. I am going to put upon someone else the thing that I should be responsible for. One did not, anymore, behold the divine and eternal within the personality of a man. All that was now beheld in Yeshua. It is not the eternal part of the soul that conquers death and is raised through its own power as divine, but it is that which was in Yeshua, the one God that will appear and raise the souls. It follows from this that an entirely new meaning was given to personality and logos. The eternal, immortal part had been taken from it. Only the personality, as such, was left. If immortality be not denied, it has to be admitted as pertaining to the personality itself. Out of the belief in the soul's eternal metamorphosis came the belief in personal immortality. The personality acquired infinite importance because it was the only thing which was left to man. You were indeed robbed of a birthright. Henceforth, there is nothing between the personality and the infinite God. There never was. A direct relationship with him must be established. That was already the case. Man was no longer capable of himself becoming divine, never was a thing, in a greater or less degree. He was simply man, standing in a direct but outward relation to God. This brought quite a new note in the conception of the world for those who knew the point of view held in the ancient mysteries. There were many people in this position during the first centuries of Christianity. They knew the nature of the mysteries. If they wished to become Christians, they were obliged to come to an understanding with the older conceptions. This brought them most difficult conflicts within their souls. They sought in the most various ways to effect a settlement between the two tendencies in the conception of the world. This conflict is reflected in the writings of the early Christian times, in those of heathens attracted by the sublimity of Christianity, as well as in the writings of those Christians who found it hard to give up the conceptions of the mysteries. Slowly did Christianity grow out of these mysteries. On the one hand, Christian convictions were presented in the form of the mystery truths, and on the other, the mystery wisdom was clothed in Christian words, because obviously you have to clothe it and hide it in order for it to be available to everyone openly. Clement of Alexandria, a Christian writer whose education had been pagan, is an instance of this. God has not forbidden us to rest from the good deeds when keeping the Sabbath. He permits those who can grasp them to share in the divine mysteries and in the sacred light. He has not revealed to the crowd what is not suitable for them. He judged it fitting to reveal it only to a few, who were able to grasp it and to work out in themselves the unspeakable mystery which God confided to the Logos, not to the written word. And God hath set some in the church as apostles, and some as prophets, and some as evangelists, and some as pastors and teachers, for the perfecting of the saints, for the work of the ministry, and for the edifying of the body of Christ. Individual souls in those days sought by very different paths to find the way from the ancient views to the Christian ones, and the one who thought he was on the right path called others heretics. In the meanwhile, the church grew stronger and stronger as an outward institution. The more power it gained, the more did the path, recognized as the right one by the decisions of the councils, take the place of personal investigation, again taking away that power. It was for the church to decide who deviated too far from the divine truth which she guarded. The idea of the heretic took firmer and firmer shape. During the first centuries of Christianity, the search for the divine path was a much more personal matter than it afterward became. A long distance had been traveled before Augustine's conviction became possible. I should not believe in the truth of the Gospels unless the authority of the Catholic Church forced me to do so. The conflict between the method of the mysteries and that of the Christian religion acquired a special stamp through the various Gnostic sects and writers. We may class as Gnostics all the writers of the first Christian centuries who sought for a deep spiritual meaning in Christian teachings. A brilliant account of the developments of the Gnosis is given in G.R.S.'s book mentioned above, Fragments of a Faith Forgotten, and once again, we have read the entirety of that if you are interested. We understand the Gnostics when we look upon them as saturated with the ancient wisdom of the mysteries and striving to understand Christianity from that point of view. For them, Christ was the Logos, and as such of a spiritual nature. In his primal essence, he cannot approach man from without. He must be awakened in the soul. That is because the Logos is the creative element of the universe and not any particular person. But the historical Yeshua must bear some relation to the spiritual Logos. No. No, he doesn't. This was the crucial point for the Gnostics. Some settled it in one way, some in another. The essential point common to them all was that to arrive at a true understanding of the Christ idea, mere historical tradition was not enough, but that it must be sought either in the wisdom of the mysteries or in the Neoplatonic philosophy, which was derived from the same source. The Gnostics had confidence in human wisdom and believed it capable of bringing forth a Christ by whom the historical Christ could be measured. In fact, through whom alone the latter could be understood and beheld in the right light. Not necessarily. Of special interest from this point of view is the doctrine given in the books of Dionysius, the Areopagite. It is true, there is no mention of these writings till the 6th century. It matters little when and where they were written. The point is that they give an account of Christianity which is clothed in the language of the Neoplatonic philosophy and presented in the form of a spiritual contemplation of the higher world. At all events, this is a form of delineation which belongs to the first Christian centuries. In older times, the truth was handed on in the form of oral tradition. The most important things were not entrusted to writing. The Christianity described in the writings of Dionysius is set forth in the mirror of the Neoplatonic conception of the world. Sense perception troubles man's spiritual vision. He must reach out beyond the senses, but all human ideas are primarily derived from observation by the senses. What man perceives with his senses, he calls existence. What he does not so perceive, he calls non-existence. Therefore, if he wishes to open up an actual view of the divine, he must rise above the existence and non-existence. For these also, as he conceives them, have their origin in the sphere of the senses. In this sense, God is neither existent nor non-existent. He is super-existent. Consequently, he cannot be attained by means of ordinary cognition, which has to do with existing things. We have to be raised above ourselves, above our sense observation, above our reasoning logic, if we are to find the way to spiritual vision. Thence we are able to get a glimpse into the perspectives of the divine. But this super-existent divinity has brought forth the Logos, the basis of the universe, filled with wisdom. To him, man's lower powers are able to attain. He is present in the cosmos as the spiritual Son of God. He is the mediator between God and man. There is no need for a mediator between you and man. You can go directly to God. He may be present in men in various degrees. He may, for instance, be realized in an external institution in which those diversely imbued with his spirit are grouped in a hierarchy. A church of this kind is the outer reality of the Logos. No, and the power which lives in it lived in a personal way in the Christ become flesh, in Yeshua. No, thus the church is through Yeshua united to God. Yeshua is its meaning and its crowning point, this earthly man. One thing was clear to all Gnosis, that they must come to an understanding about the personality of Yeshua. Christ and Yeshua must be brought into connection with one another. Divinity was taken away from human personality and must, in one way or another, be recovered. It must be possible to find it again in Yeshua. The mystic had to do with the degree of divinity within himself and with his earthly personality. The Christian had to do with the latter, and also with a perfect God, far above all that is attainable by humanity. If we hold firmly to this point of view, a fundamental mystic attitude of the soul is only possible when the soul's spiritual eyes are opened. When, through finding higher spiritual possibilities within itself, the soul throws itself open to the light which issues from Christ and Yeshua, the union of the soul with its highest powers is, at the same time, union with the historical Christ. For mysticism is an immediate consciousness and feeling of the divine within the soul, but a God far transcending everything human can never dwell in the soul in the real sense of the word. That is true. The Gnosis and all subsequent Christian mysticism represent the effort, in some way or another, to lay hold of that God and to apprehend him directly in the soul. You can do that without any of the control systems. That is a possibility that I have done. You can do it too. A conflict in this case was inevitable. It was really only possible for a man to find his own divine part. But this is both human and divine. The divine at a certain stage of development. Yet the Christian God is a definite one, perfect in himself. It was possible for a person to find in himself the power to strive upwards to this God, but he could not say that what he experienced in his own soul at any stage of development was one with God. The great gulf was fixed between what it was possible to find in the soul and what Christianity called divine. It is the gulf between science and faith, between knowledge and religious feeling. This gulf does not exist for the mystic in the old sense of the word, for he knows for a certainty. He can only comprehend the divine by degrees, and he also knows why this is so. It is clear to him that this gradual attainment is a real attainment of a real divine life, and he finds it difficult to speak of a perfect, isolated, driving divine principle. A mystic of this kind does not seek a perfect God, but he wishes to experience the divine life. He seeks to be made divine, not to gain an external relation to the Godhead. I disagree with that. It is of the essence of Christianity that its mysticism in this sense starts with an assumption. The Christian mystic seeks to behold divinity within him, but at the same time he looks up to the historical Christ as his physical eyes do to the sun. Just as the sun is the means by which physical eyes behold physical objects, so does the Christian mystic intensify his inner nature, that it may behold the divine, and the light which makes such vision possible for him is the fact of the appearance of Christ. It is he who enables man to attain his highest possibilities. It is in this way that the Christian mystics of the Middle Ages differ from the mystics of the ancient mysteries. See my book, mystics of the Renaissance. And that is going to bring us to chapter 12, Christianity and the Heathen Wisdom. At the time of the first beginnings of Christianity, there appear in heathen civilization conceptions of the universe which seem to be a continuation of the Platonic philosophy and which may also be taken as a deepening and spiritualization of the wisdom of the mysteries. The beginning of such conceptions is to be dated from Philo of Alexandria. From his point of view, the processes which lead to the divine take place in the innermost part of the human soul. We might say that the temple in which Philo seeks initiation is wholly within him, and his higher experiences are the mysteries. In his case, processes of a purely spiritual nature replace the initiatory ceremonies of the sanctuary. That is where I am at. I mean, everything that I tell you about is a purely spiritual thing with no need for any ceremonies. According to Philo, since observation and knowledge gained through the logical intellect do not lead to the divine, they have merely to do with what is perishable. But there is a way by which the soul may rise above these methods. It must come out of what it calls its ordinary self. From this, it must withdraw. Then it enters a state of spiritual exaltation and illumination, in which it no longer knows, thinks, and judges in the ordinary sense of the words, for it has become merged, identified with the divine, which is experienced in its essence and cannot be imparted in thought concepts or abstract ideas. It is experienced, and one who goes through this experience knows that no one can impart it. How many times have I told you? I can relay it to you, I cannot give it to you. For the only way of reaching it is to live it. The visible world is an image of this mystic reality, which is experienced in the innermost recesses of the soul. The world has come forth from the invisible, inconceivable God. The harmony of the cosmos, which is steeped in wisdom, and to which, since phenomena are subject, is a direct reflection of the Godhead, its spiritual image. It is divine spirit poured out into the world, cosmic reason, the Logos, the offspring or Son of God. The Logos is the mediator between the world of sense and the unimaginable God. When man steeps himself in knowledge, he becomes united with the Logos, which is embodied in him. I agree with this. The person who has developed spirituality is the vehicle of the Logos. That is every single person, right? To a differing degree, right? Even if you have not developed it, you still have the Logos. You're just not using it. You don't understand it. You don't comprehend it. It is not your vehicle until you can take control of it. You're just a passenger in the car. Once you take control of it, you're the driver in the car. That is what this is talking about, becoming the driver of the vehicle. Above the Logos is God. Beneath it, the perishable world. Absolutely agree. Again, I am going to link the standalone video, The Divine and the Trinity Explained, so that you can see that this is exactly what I've already said. It is man's vocation to form the link between the two. What he experiences in his inmost being, as spirit, is the universal spirit. Such ideas are directly reminiscent of the Pythagorean manner of thinking. The center of existence is sought in the inner life, but this life is conscious of its cosmic value. St. Augustine was thinking in virtually the same way as Philo when he said, "We see all created things because they are, but they are because God sees them." And he adds, "Concerning what and how we see. And because they are, we see them outwardly. Because they are perfect, we see them inwardly." Plato has the same fundamental idea. Like Plato, Philo sees in the destiny of the human soul the closing act of the great cosmic drama, the awakening of the divinity that is under a spell. He thus describes the interactions of the soul. The wisdom in man's inner being walks along, tracing the paths of the Father, and shapes the forms while beholding the archetypes. There is no personal matter for man to create forms in his inner being. They are the eternal wisdom. They are the cosmic life. This is in harmony with the interpretation of the myths of the people in the light of the mysteries. The mystic searches for the deeper truth in the myths. And as the mystic treats the myths of paganism, Philo handles Moses' story of the creation. The Old Testament accounts are for him images of inner soul processes. The Bible relates the creation of the world. One who merely takes it as a description of outer events only half knows it. It is certainly written, "In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved on the face of the waters." That was the Logos. But the real inner meaning, like quite literally, that was Logos, right? In the beginning, or before the beginning, there was God. And then God decided to create and became the God that is limited into spirit, right? God the infinite, ununderstandable, the incomprehensible, infinite divine, limited himself into creation by creating creation. That is the moment of the beginning. That moment taken in stasis, everything whole and still, right? Every single atom is in existence. Everything that ever will become something is already there. It just has not become anything yet. It is like the air around us, completely without form and void. And then God spoke and said, I am the light. And it was good. That is how that worked. He spoke and created. And when the moment of speaking changes that moment of beginning into the moment of becoming, right? You go from now into the next. That is the spirit in motion. The spirit in motion is the Logos. It is the word that God spoke for creation. I am. It's the exact same as the Logos. The exact same as the Logos is the I am statement from Genesis. And so there's an important lesson in that. Once again, I will refer you to the standalone video. But this does describe that, right? In the beginning, God created the heavens and earth through the desire to create the heavens and earth. It went from God into the Spirit. And the earth was without form, and the Spirit of God moved on the face of the waters, is quite literally speaking Logos into action. But the real inner meaning of the words must be lived in the depths of the soul. God must be found within. Then he appears as the primal splendor who sends out innumerable rays, not perceptible by the senses, but collectively thinkable. This is Philo's expression. In the Timaeus of Plato, which we have covered in its entirety and is probably going to be misquoted, the words are almost identical with the Bible ones. Now when the Father, who had created the universe, saw how it had become living and animated in an image of the eternal gods, he felt pleasure therein. In the Bible, we read, "And God saw that it was good." I actually don't think that was a misquote. For the first time since they have talked about Timaeus and Critias, that is the first time I don't think they have misquoted it. The recognition of the divine is for Philo, as well as for Plato, and in the wisdom of the mysteries, to live through the processes of creation in one's own soul. The history of creation and the history of the soul, which is becoming divine, in this way flows into one. And here's an important note. Your soul is not becoming divine. Your soul is already divine. It's not a god, right? It is the individualized piece of divinity which God assigns to this meat suit for you, right? This 5D navigation device, this temple of God, is resided in by the small, individualized section of the divine, which is you. You are not God. You are not ever going to become a god, and you cannot create more divinity in your life. You can align yourself with the divinity that you already have, but you cannot create more divinity in your life. You cannot become divine. You already are. You can just align yourself with that divinity. And again, you are not a god. Philo is convinced that Moses' account of the creation may be used for writing the history of the soul, which is seeking God. Everything in the Bible thereby acquires a profoundly symbolical meaning, of which Philo becomes the interpreter. He reads the Bible as a history of the soul. We may say that Philo's manner of reading the Bible corresponds to corresponds to a feature of his age which originated in the wisdom of the mysteries. He indeed relates that the Therapeutae interpreted ancient writings in the same way. They also possess works by ancient authors who once directed their school and left behind many explanations about the customary method pursued in allegorical writings. The interpretation of such writings is directed to the deeper meaning of the allegorical narratives. Thus, Philo's aim was to discover the deeper meaning of the allegorical narratives in the Old Testament. Let us try to realize whether such an interpretation could lead. We read the account of creation and find in it not only a narrative of outward events, but an indication of the way which the soul has to take in order to attain to the divine. Thus, the soul must reproduce in itself as a microcosm the ways of God, and this alone, and in this alone, can its efforts after wisdom consist. The drama of the universe must be enacted in each individual soul. The inner life of the mystical sage is the realization of the image given in the account of creation. Moses wrote not only to relate historical facts, but to present pictorially the paths to which the soul must travel if it would find God. It is important to note that it is almost certain that Moses did not write any books in the Bible. All this, in Philo's conception of the universe, is enacted within the human soul. Man experiences within himself what God has experienced in the universe. The Word of God, the Logos, becomes an event in the soul. Kinda, right? It is literally every event. God brought the Jews from Egypt into Palestine. That is some contention. He let them go through the distress and privation before giving them that land of promise. Giving is a big word. That is the outward event. Man must experience it inwardly. He goes from the land of Egypt, the perishable world, through the privations which lead to the suppression of the sense nature into the promised land of the soul. He attains the eternal, and again, that is not something you can gain. It is already a guarantee. With Philo, it is all an inward process. The God who poured himself forth into the world consummates his resurrection in the soul when that soul understands his creative word and echoes it. Then, man has spiritually given birth within himself to divinity, to the divine spirit, which became man, to the Logos, Christ. In this sense, knowledge was, for Philo and those who thought like him, the birth of Christ within the world of spirit. The Neoplatonic philosophy, which developed contemporaneously with Christianity, was an elaboration of Philo's thought. Let us see how Plotinus describes his spiritual experiences. Often, when I come to myself on awakening from bodily sleep and, turning from the outer world, enter into myself, I behold wondrous beauty. Then I am sure that I have been conscious for the better part of myself. I live my true life. I am one with the divine, and, rooted in the divine, gain the power to transport myself beyond even the superworld. After thus resting in God, when I descend from spiritual vision and again form thoughts, I ask myself how it has happened that I now descend and that my soul ever entered the body at all, since, in its essence, it is what has just revealed itself to me. What can the reason be for souls forgetting God the Father, since they come from the beyond and belong to him, and when they forget him, know nothing of him or of themselves? I got the answer to that. That is a question I can answer. You are here for the experience of life. You are here to experience all of life. Some of it is wonderful. Sometimes you will meet the love of your life and you will live together for 80 years and you will raise children and have a great life. And that is not to say that there won't be problems, but that is a wonderful outcome, right? And then sometimes you don't. Sometimes lessons suck. Sometimes you lose your spouse, or you lose your child, or your house burns down, or you break a leg, or all kinds of horrible things happen to you. It is all about the experience. You agreed to those prior to coming here. Most of them, anyway. Most of the big experiences in your life are to teach you lessons. You are here to learn lessons, and sometimes those lessons suck, but you agreed to them. Part of that agreement is that you forget that you agreed to it, because if you knew going in that this is a trial, then the trial gets a little bit easier. That is part of the path of spiritual enlightenment. Once you realize that no matter what happens to you, it's to teach you a lesson, even the tough parts, even the broken leg, right? I point that out because I got one right now, right? I could very well sit in it and dwell and become bitter and mean, or I could find the lesson in it. I found lessons in it. I found gratitude. I found humility, right? I found lessons in this. I found the meaning behind the lesson that I learned. That doesn't mean I found all of them, but I am searching for them. That's the point of it. And that's the point of forgetting. Because if I knew that my leg was going to be broken, I might try to change that, right? The first false step they take is indulging in presumption, the desire to become, and in forgetfulness of their true self, and in the pleasure of only belonging to themselves. They coveted self-glorification, they rushed about in pursuit of their desires, and thus went astray and fell completely away. Thereupon they lost all knowledge of their origin in the beyond, just as children, early separated from their parents and brought up elsewhere, do not know who they themselves and their parents are. Plotinus delineates the kind of life which the soul should strive to develop. The life of the body and its longings should be stilled. The soul should see calm in all that surrounds it, in earth, sea, and air, and heaven itself no movement. It should learn to see how the soul pours itself from without into the serene cosmos, streaming into it from all sides as the sun's rays illuminate the dark cloud and make it golden. So does the soul, on entering the body of the world encircled by the sky, give it life and immortality. It is evident that this vision of the world is very similar to that of Christianity. Believers in the community of Yeshua said, "That which was from the beginning, which we have heard, which we have seen with our eyes, which we have looked upon, and our hands have handled, the word of life, declare we unto you." In the same way it might be said in the spirit of Neoplatonism. That which was from the beginning, which cannot be heard and seen, must be spiritually experienced as the word of life. That one's closer to the truth. And so, the old conception of the universe is developed and splits into two leading ideas. It leads into Neoplatonism and similar systems to an idea of Christ which is purely spiritual. On the other hand, it leads to a fusion of the idea of Christ with a historical manifestation, the personality of Yeshua. The writer of the Gospel of St. John may be said to unite these two conceptions. In the beginning was the Word. John is completely mistaken in what the Word is. He shares this conviction with the Neoplatonist. The Word becomes spirit within the soul. Thus do the Neoplatonists conclude. The Word was made flesh in Yeshua. Thus does St. John conclude, and with him the whole Christian community. That is a good reason to fall away. The inner meaning of the manner in which the Word was made flesh was given in all the ancient cosmogonies. Plato says of the macrocosm, God has extended the body of the world on the soul of the world in the form of a cross. The soul of the world is the Logos. If the Logos is to be made flesh, he must recapitulate the cosmic process in the fleshly existence. The Logos cannot be made flesh, right? And so this statement is unnecessary. He must be nailed to the cross and rise again, and again, completely unnecessary. In spiritual form, this most momentous thought of Christianity had long before been prefigured in the old cosmogonies. No, the mystic went through it as a personal experience in initiation. The Logos, become man, had to go through it in a way that made this fact one that is true for, or valid to, the whole of humanity, because everybody is affected. Nobody is denying that at all. Something which was present under the old dispensation, God, I hate that word, as an incident in the mysteries, becomes a historical fact through Christianity. Hence, Christianity was the fulfillment not only of what the Jewish prophets had predicted, but also of the truth which had been prefigured in the mysteries. Now, I say I hate this word because it intimates something, right? It tells you something. God just didn't give you all of the information, right? It was completely irrelevant for God to give you the information now. But in 6 months, there'll be a new dispensation and new information will come and everything will change. God didn't need to give you the truth to begin with. He didn't need to give you a system that would work. He gave you a system that would change because, the Word of God changes. Once upon a time, it was perfectly fine to beat people in the head with stones if they picked up sticks on the wrong day. But now we're in a different dispensation. God has changed his mind. It's no longer okay to hit people in the head with stones and when they pick up sticks because it's a new time. because now there is a new truth, because God is changing, and God doesn't give you the truth to begin with, he changes it over time. I really don't like that word. The cross of Golgotha gathers together in one fact the whole cult of the mystery of antiquity. We find the cross first in the ancient cosmogonies. At the starting point of Christianity, it confronts us in a unique event which has supreme value for the whole of mankind. It is from this point of view that it is possible for the reason to apprehend the mystical element in Christianity. Christianity as a mystical fact is a milestone in the process of human evolution, and the incidents in the mysteries, with their attendant results, are the preparation for that mystical fact. And that's going to bring us to the final chapter in the study, chapter 13, St. Augustine and the Church. The full force of the conflict which was enacted in the souls of Christian believers during the transition from paganism to the new religion is exhibited in the person of St. Augustine. The spiritual struggles of Origen, Clement of Alexandria, Gregory, Nazianzen, Jerome, and others are full of mysterious interest when we see them calmed and laid to rest in the mind of Augustine. In Augustine's personality, deep spiritual needs developed out of a passionate nature. He passed through pagan and semi-Christian ideas. He suffered deeply from the most appalling doubts of the land which attack one who has felt the impotence of many varieties of thought in the face of spiritual problems, and who has tasted the depressing effect of the question, can man know anything whatever? At the beginning of his struggles, Augustine's thoughts clung to the perishable things of sense. He could only picture the spiritual to himself in material images. It is a deliverance for him when he rises above this stage. He thus describes it in his Confessions. When I wished to think of God, I could only imagine immense masses of bodies, and believed that was the only kind of thing that could exist. This was the chief and almost the only cause of the errors which I could not avoid. He thus indicates the point at which a person must arrive who is seeking the true life of the spirit. There are thinkers, not a few, who maintain that it is impossible to arrive at pure thought, free from any material admixture. They are wrong. They are wrong. These thinkers confuse what they feel bound to say about their own inner life with what is humanly possible. The truth, rather, is that it is only possible to arrive at higher knowledge when thought has been liberated from all material things, when an inner life has been developed in which images of reality do not cease, when their demonstration in sense impressions comes to an end. Augustine relates how he attained to spiritual vision. Everywhere he asked where the divine was to be found. I asked the earth, and she said, I am not it, and all that was upon the earth said the same. I asked the ocean and the abysses, and all that lives in them, which said, We are not thy God, seek beyond us. I asked the winds, and the whole atmosphere and its inhabitants said, The philosophers who sought for the essence of things in us were under an illusion, we are not God. I asked the sun, moon, and stars, which said, We are not God whom thou seekest. And it came home to St. Augustine that there is only one thing which can answer his question about the divine, his own soul. The soul said, No eyes nor ears can impart to thee what is in me, for I alone can tell thee, and I tell thee in an unquestionable way. Men may be doubtful whether vital force is situate in air or in fire, but who can doubt that he himself lives, remembers, understands, wills, thinks, knows, and judges? If he doubts, it is a proof that he is alive. He remembers why he doubts. He understands that he doubts. He will assure himself of things he thinks. He knows that he knows nothing. He judges that he must not accept anything hastily. Outer things do not defend themselves when their essence and existence are denied, but the soul does defend itself. It could not be doubtful of itself unless it existed. By its doubts, it confirms its own existence. We are, and we recognize our being, and we love our own being and knowledge. On these 3 points, no illusion in the garb of truth can trouble us, for we do not apprehend them with our bodily senses like external things. Man learns about the divine by leading his soul to know itself as spiritual, so that it might find its way, as a spirit, into the spiritual world. Augustine had battled his way through to this knowledge. It was out of such an attitude of mind that there grew up in pagan nations the desire to knock at the gate of the mysteries. In the age of Augustine, such convictions might lead to becoming a Christian. Yeshua, the Logos, became man and shown the path which must be followed if the soul would attain the goal which it sees when in communion with itself. Not necessarily. In A.D. 385 at Milan, Augustine was instructed by St. Ambrose. All his doubts about the Old and New Testament vanished when his teacher interpreted the most important passages, not merely in a literal sense, but by lifting the mystic veil by force of the Spirit. What had been guarded in the mysteries was embodied for Augustine in the historical tradition of the evangelist and in the community where that tradition was preserved. He comes by degrees to the conviction that the law of this tradition, which consists in believing that what it has not proved is moderate and without guile. He arrives at the idea, who could be so blind as to say that the Church of the Apostles deserves to have no faith placed in it, when it is so loyal and is supported by the conformity of so many brethren? That's absolutely a good judge of something working, is everybody flocking to it. That absolutely makes sense. The gate is absolutely just huge. It is wide. Everybody just walks through. When these have handed down their writings to posterity so conscientiously, and when the Church has so strictly maintained the succession of teachers down to our present bishops. Yeah, buddy, there's no control in that. There's no making the narrative fit what you want to and strictly maintain the succession of teachers down to our present bishops. There is no limiting of the information by controlling who controls the information and can dispense it. There's none of that. It is widely and freely available. Everybody is free to pick from the fruit, right? It is so easy because of the explanations given by the book. Augustine's mode of thought told him that with the coming of Christ, other conditions had set in for the soul seeking after the Spirit than those which had previously existed. For him, it was firmly established that in Christ Yeshua had been revealed, in outer historical fact, that which the mystic had sought in the mysteries through preparation. One of his most significant utterances is the following: what is now called the Christian religion already existed amongst the ancients and was not lacking at the very beginnings of the human race. When Christ appeared in the flesh, the true religion already in existence received the name of Christian. Yeah, because it was absolutely necessary for some man to die for your sins prior to that. That's exactly how it was going down. There were two ways possible for such a method of thought. One way is that if the human soul develops within it the forces which lead it to the knowledge of its true self, it will, if it only goes far enough, come also to the knowledge of the Christ and of everything connected with him. This would have been a mystery wisdom, enriched through the Christ event. The other way is taken by Augustine, and is that by which he became the great model for his successors. It consists in cutting off the development of the forces of the soul at a certain point, and in borrowing the ideas connected with the coming of the Christ from written accounts and oral traditions. Augustine rejected the first way as springing from pride of the soul. He thought the second was the way of the true humility. Thus, he says to those who wish to follow the first way, "You may find peace in the truth, but for that humility is needed which does not suit your proud neck," says an ascetic. On the other hand, he was filled with boundless inward happiness by the fact that since the coming of Christ in the flesh, it was possible to say that every soul can come to spiritual experience, which goes as far as it can in seeking within itself, and then, in order to attain to the highest, has confidence in what was written and oral traditions of the Christian Church tell us about Christ and his revelation. It is important to note that it was possible that every soul have a spiritual experience without anybody ever having to die. He says on this point, "What bliss, what abiding enjoyment of supreme and true good is offered us, what serenity, what a breath of eternity. How shall I describe it? It has been expressed as far as it could be by those great incomparable souls who we admit have beheld and still behold. we reach a point at which we acknowledge how true is what we have been commanded to believe, and how well and beneficently we have been brought up by our mother, the Church, and what benefit was the milk given to the Apostle Paul to the little ones. It is beyond the scope of this book to give an account of the alternative method which is evolved from the mystery wisdom enriched through the Christ event. The description of this method will be found in An Outline of Occult Science, whereas in pre-Christian times, one who wished to seek the spiritual basis of existence was necessarily directed to the way of the mysteries. Augustine was able to say, even to those souls who could find no such path within themselves, "Go as far as you can on the path of knowledge with your human powers. Thence, trust, faith, will carry you up into the higher spiritual regions." It was only going one step further to say it is natural to the human soul only to be able to arrive at a certain state of knowledge through its own powers. Thence, it can only advance further through trust, through faith in written and oral tradition. This step was taken by the spiritual movement, which assigned to knowledge a certain sphere, above which the soul could not rise by its own efforts, and is a limitation placed upon it by man. But everything which lay beyond this domain was made an object of faith, which has to be supported by written and oral tradition, and by confidence in its representatives. Thomas Aquinas, the greatest teacher within the Church, has set forth this doctrine in his writings in a variety of ways. His main point is that human knowledge can only attain to that which led Augustine to self-knowledge, to the certainty of the divine. The nature of the divine and its relation to the world is given by revealed theology, which is not accessible to man's own researches and is, as the substance of faith, superior to all knowledge, and I disagree heartily with this. It is absolutely accessible to man's own researches. That is how I got there. It was definitely not from following any of these teachings. The origin of this point of view may be studied in the theology of John Scotus Erigena, who lived in the 9th century at the court of Charles the Bald, and who represents a natural transition from the earliest ideas of Christianity to the ideas of Thomas Aquinas. His conception of the universe is couched in the spirit of Neoplatonism. In his treatise, De Divisione Naturae, Erigena has elaborated the teachings of Dionysius the Areopagite. This teaching started from a God far above the perishable things of sense, and it derived the word world from him. Man is involved in the transmutation of all beings into this God, who finally becomes what he was from the beginning. Everything falls back again into the Godhead, which has passed through the universal process and has finally become perfected. But in order to reach this goal, man must find the way to the Logos, who was made flesh. Untrue. In Erigena, this thought leads to another, that what is contained in the writings, which give an account of the Logos, leads, when received in faith, to salvation. Reason and the authority of the Scriptures, faith and knowledge, stand on the same level. The one does not contradict the other, but faith must bring that to which knowledge can never attain by itself. The knowledge of the eternal, which the ancient mysteries withheld from the multitude, became, when presented in this way by Christian thought and feeling, the content of faith, which by its very nature had to do with something unattainable by mere knowledge. The conviction of the pre-Christian mystic was that to him was given the knowledge of the divine, while the people were obliged to have faith in its expression in images. Christianity came to the conviction that God has given his wisdom to mankind through revelation, and man attains through his knowledge an image of this divine revelation. The wisdom of the mysteries is a hothouse plant, which is revealed to a few individuals ripe for it. Christian wisdom is a mystery, revealed as knowledge to none, but as a content of faith revealed to all. The standpoint of the mysteries lived on in Christianity, but in a different form. All, not only the special individual, were to share in the truth, but the process was that at a certain point man owned his inability to penetrate farther by means of knowledge, and thence ascend to faith. Christianity brought the content of the mysteries out of the obscurity of the temple into the clear light of day, because it is so very clear that the mysteries are what are intended by the Gospels. The one Christian movement mentioned led to the idea that this content must necessarily be retained in the form of faith. And that is going to bring us to the end of the study of Christianity as a mystical fact. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a series of somewhat difficult concepts. I understand I have some unconventional beliefs, and I have a tendency to step on toes when I relay those. It is not intentional, but it is not something I apologize for. Everything that I stated here, I stand upon, right? The logos cannot ever be any singular person. It is quite literally every form of movement ever, right? If I move my hand like this and the wind moves in that direction, that is the logos. And when rain falls, that is the logos. When these lights shine, that is the logos. My heart beating, that is the logos. It is quite literally creation in motion. The word of creation spoken, creating the motion that creates existence. And so it cannot be a man. That is a fundamental problem with the book of John at a minimum, right? The rest of it too, right? There is no separation from you and God. You can turn directly to God with no intervention between necessary. No priest, no priestess, no person ever who has ever lived has to stand between you and God. Nobody has to approve your forgiveness. You can go directly to the Creator and ask for forgiveness. Ask for a change in your life and you will receive it without having to kill anything. And that is true for the entirety of history. The dispensation tried to do away with part of that, but that's one of the reasons why I don't like it, right? There was never a time, ever, in the history of ever, where you had to kill anything to be forgiven from sin. That has never been a thing. There has never been a cow, a goat, a chicken, a pigeon, nothing ever has been the stand-in for you to atone for you. The only thing required has always been for you to repent of your sin and ask for forgiveness. That's the only requirement. That's a big deal, right? It tells you that in the book, right? We did a Bible study, 162 videos, where we read it. We saw what the words meant. We pulled the knowledge from it, and the knowledge is not what everybody thinks. It is completely different. The God of Judaism is horrible. A horrible, bloodthirsty God with avarice in his heart. He is a spiteful, mean-spirited entity. That is something to take into consideration before you give your worship. If you like what I'm doing over here, let me know down below. Give me a like, a share, a sub, throw me a comment. If you agree or disagree with anything that was stated, put it in the box down below, and if it remains respectful, it gets to remain up. If there is another work you would like to see me read or discuss in the manner we are doing here, drop that in the box as well. And if you really like what I'm doing over here, hit me with the super thanks. Consider joining for a membership or picking up a copy of my book. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you were here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. And this has been Pitt's Tape. Peace.